I never imagined I would live long enough to see my own son become someone I no longer recognized. People always tell you that a mother's love is unconditional, that no matter what your child does, your heart will always protect them. I believed that for most of my life, but there are moments that test even the deepest love. Moments that force you to choose between protecting your child and standing up for what is right. This was one of those moments. My name is Eleanor Wright. I'm 62 years old, a retired nurse, and a mother of two. My eldest is my son, Daniel. I raised him mostly on my own after his father passed away when Daniel was just 12. From that day on, it was just the two of us against the world. I worked double shifts, missed holidays, and came home exhausted. But I never missed his school plays or baseball games. I wanted him to grow into a kind, responsible man. For a long time, I thought I had succeeded. Daniel married Laura 8 years ago. Laura was gentle, intelligent, and quietly strong. She worked as a high school English teacher and had a laugh that filled a room without demanding attention. From the very beginning, she treated me not like an obstacle or a burden, but like family. She called me mom before I ever asked her to. When Daniel and Laura struggled to have children, she cried in my arms, not his. I loved her like the daughter I never had. Everything changed the year Laura got sick. At first, it was small things: fatigue, weight loss, a cough that wouldn't go away, doctor's appointments that stretched longer than expected. Then came the word no one ever wants to hear: cancer, stage 4, aggressive. The kind of diagnosis that steals the air from your lungs and replaces it with fear. Laura tried to stay strong. She kept teaching until she physically couldn't stand in front of her classroom anymore. Daniel promised he would be there for her. He said all the right words. He hugged her, kissed her forehead, and told everyone he was going to fight this battle with his wife. But promises are easy. Character is revealed in actions. As the months passed, Laura's health declined rapidly. Chemotherapy drained the color from her face and the strength from her body. She needed help with everything: eating, bathing, walking from the bedroom to the couch. I stepped back into my old nursing instincts, staying overnight at their house, cooking, cleaning, managing medications. Daniel, on the other hand, was suddenly very busy. He said work was stressful. He said he needed breaks. He said he couldn't watch her suffer all the time. One night, while Laura slept in the hospital bed we had set up in the living room, I overheard Daniel laughing on the phone in the kitchen. Not the nervous, forced laugh of a worried husband. A carefree laugh. The kind he hadn't used around Laura in months. When I asked him who it was, he brushed me off. Just friends. Friends turned into late nights. Late nights turned into the entire weekends away. He said he was driving around to clear his head. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. A mother doesn't want to imagine the worst about her child. Then, one afternoon, everything shattered. I had gone out to pick up Laura's prescriptions. When I returned, my neighbor pulled me aside. Her face was tight with discomfort, the way people look when they don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I didn't know how to tell you, she said quietly. But I saw Daniel last night. He was downtown with 2 young women. They were drinking, laughing, acting like people without a care in the world. I felt my stomach drop. That night, I checked his phone while he showered. I am not proud of it, but I needed the truth. Messages, photos, videos, him in the driver's seat, music blasting, girls hanging out the windows, smiling like life was a party, captains joking about being finally free. Meanwhile, his wife was dying 10 feet away. I sat on the edge of the bed and cried silently so Laura wouldn't hear me. Days later, Laura took my hand and whispered, "He's not coming back tonight, is he?" I couldn't lie anymore. Not to her. She closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek. I just wanted him to hold my hand at the end. That sentence broke something inside me that could never be repaired. Laura passed away 2 weeks later. Daniel arrived at the hospital 30 minutes after she was gone. He didn't see her take her last breath. He didn't hear her final words. He stood at the foot of the bed, staring at her body like he was looking at a stranger, and said, "I didn't think it would happen so fast." At the funeral, he cried loudly, too loudly. People hugged him, told him how strong he was, how devoted he had been. I watched in silence, my hands clenched so tightly my nails cut into my palms. After the burial, Daniel came to my house. He looked exhausted, unshaven, hollow-eyed. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once helped him with homework and kissed scraped knees. I did my best, he said. You know that, Mom? Something in me snapped. I stood up slowly. My voice was calm, almost too calm. No, I said, you didn't. He looked up, confused. What do you mean? I took a deep breath. While your wife was dying, you were driving around with other women, laughing, drinking, pretending your life wasn't falling apart. His face went pale. You don't understand. I was overwhelmed. I needed escape. I leaned forward, my hand shaking now. Laura didn't get an escape. She didn't get to drive around pretending she wasn't dying. She lay in pain every night, waiting for the man she loved to come home. He tried to interrupt me, but I raised my hand. You failed her, I said, and for the first time in my life, I am ashamed of you. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Daniel stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, searching for a defense that didn't exist. Tears streamed down his face, but they didn't move me. You asked me once what kind of man your father was. I continued. Let me tell you, when I was sick, when I couldn't stand, when I was afraid, he never left my side. Not once. That is what love looks like. And that is what you chose not to be. He collapsed into the chair sobbing. I hate myself, he whispered. That, I said quietly, is something you'll have to live with. I told him he needed to leave. For weeks, we didn't speak. He stopped calling, stopped texting. Mutual friends told me he had fallen into a deep depression, lost weight, quit his job. The girls disappeared from his life as quickly as they had entered it. One night, months later, he showed up at my door. He looked smaller somehow, older. I dream about her every night, he said. She's always looking at me, waiting. I nodded. She deserved better. I know, he said, and I don't know how to forgive myself. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and felt both love and grief coexist in my chest. Some things, I said, aren't meant to be forgiven. They're meant to be remembered, so you never become that person again. He cried into my shoulder like a child, and for the first time since Laura's death, I let myself cry too. Not for him, not even for myself, but for a woman who loved deeply, suffered quietly, and left this world without the hand she deserved to be holding. My response didn't destroy my son as choices did. My words simply forced him to finally see the truth. Months passed after that night, but silence has a way of growing louder instead of fading. Daniel didn't disappear completely, but he existed like a shadow. Occasionally I would hear from mutual friends that he was trying to get better, attending therapy, volunteering at a hospice center. Of all places, I didn't ask questions. Grief doesn't move in straight lines, and guilt has its own cruel timetable. What I didn't expect was the letter. It arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a utility bill. Daniel's handwriting stopped me cold. I hadn't seen it since Laura's funeral, when he signed thank you cards like a man signing someone else's name. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before opening it, afraid of what it might ask from me. The letter wasn't an apology. Not directly. It was a confession. He wrote about the first night he stayed out late, how the laughter felt wrong even then, how every mile he drove with strangers in his car felt heavier, not lighter. He admitted, he told himself lies, that Laura was already gone, that nothing he did would change the ending, that he deserved happiness too. He wrote that those lies were easier than watching his wife fade away, easier than sitting beside a bed where love demanded courage. He wrote about the moment I confronted him, how my words replayed in his mind every day. You've failed her. He said those words followed him everywhere, louder than any accusation from strangers, because they came from the one person who had always believed in him. At the end of the letter, he didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for permission to try to become someone Laura would not be ashamed of, permission to keep living, even if guilt walked beside him forever. I folded the letter and cried until my chest hurt. A week later, I went to Laura's grave for the first time since the funeral. I hadn't been able to bring myself there before. The headstone was simple, her name, her dates, a quote from one of her favorite books about love being what remains when everything else is gone. I told her everything, about Daniel, about my anger, about how proud I was of the woman she had been even at the end. I told her I was sorry I couldn't give her back the man she deserved, When I stood to leave, I made a decision I never thought I would. I called my son. He answered on the second ring, breathless, like he had been holding his phone the whole time. We didn't talk about forgiveness. We didn't talk about the past in detail. We talked about therapy appointments, about the hospice patients he sat with in silence, about how death teaches people what really matters. Sometimes, Tule, don't expect you to look at me the same way, he said quietly. I don't, I replied honestly, but I can still hope you become better. There was a pause, then a soft, broken thank you. Our relationship didn't magically heal. Trust doesn't rebuild itself just because time passes. Some wounds don't close completely. They scar. Both scars tell stories. They warn, they remind. Daniel never remarried, at least not yet. He visits Laura's grave every month. Sometimes he brings flowers. Sometimes he just sits. He told me once that he talks to her, even though he knows she can't answer. I told him maybe she already has. In the only way that matters. People ask me if I regret what I said to my son that day, if I wish I had softened my words, protected him the way mothers are expected to. I don't. Love that lies is not love. Love that stays silent while someone is being abandoned is not kindness. Sometimes the most painful truth is the only thing strong enough to save what little remains. My response didn't erase his guilt. It didn't bring Laura back, but it stopped the lie he was living inside. And if that truth follows him for the rest of his life, then maybe it will also guide him away from who he was and toward the man he should have been all along. Time didn't soften things the way people promised it would. Instead, it sharpened memories, polishing them until every mistake, every absence, every ignored phone call shone painfully clear. Daniel tried to rebuild a life out of the wreckage he created, but rebuilding is not the same as erasing. Some losses don't allow clean starts. They demand reckoning. A year after Laura's death, Daniel asked if he could come with me to a memorial service at the hospital where I used to work. It was an annual gathering for families who had lost loved ones to long illnesses. I hesitated before agreeing. Part of me wanted to protect my own fragile peace. Another part knew avoidance was the very thing that had destroyed him once already. The service was quiet and dignified. Soft music, candles, names, read aloud one by one. When Laura's name was spoken, Daniel's shoulders trembled. I watched him from the corner of my eye, seeing not the man who failed his wife, but the boy who once cried when his goldfish died because he couldn't stand the idea of something loving him and then leaving. Afterward, a woman approached us. She introduced herself as Karen, a hospice nurse. She thanked Daniel for sitting with her patients during their final hours. She said some people can't stand the silence of death, but Daniel never rushed it, never tried to fill it with empty words. He just held hands. Daniel said nothing, but I saw his eyes fill. For the first time since Laura's illness, someone spoke to him not with pity or anger, but with quiet respect. I realized then that redemption doesn't arrive as a grand moment. It comes in small, unremarkable acts that no one applauds. Later, that night, Daniel admitted something he had never said out loud. He told me that when Laura was dying, he was terrified not of losing her, but of becoming nothing without her. He had built his identity around being a husband, a normal man with a normal life. When that life began to crumble, he ran to distraction instead of responsibility. I wasn't brave enough to stay, he said, and I will hate myself for that forever. I didn't argue. Some truths don't need correction. Months later, Daniel met someone. He told me carefully, like a man handling glass. Her name was Rebecca. She was kind, patient, and fully aware of his past. She didn't try to replace Laura. She didn't ask him to forget. That, more than anything, scared him. He almost ended it before it began, convinced he didn't deserve another chance at love. When he told me this, I asked him a question I had never asked before. What would Laura want for you? He closed his eyes. She'd want me to live honestly. So he tried. The relationship moved slowly. Daniel set boundaries he had never known how to set before. He didn't disappear when things became difficult. When Rebecca's mother fell ill, he stayed. Night after night. No excuses, no escapes. Watching him was painful, Growth often is. Every time he chose differently, it highlighted how disastrously wrong he had chosen before. Asterisk, on the second anniversary of Laura's death, Daniel invited me to dinner. He cooked Laura's favorite meal, following her handwritten recipe. The kitchen smelled like memory. Halfway through eating, he broke down, apologizing not just for what he had done to his wife, but for what he had done to me, for forcing me to carry the weight of his failure. Asterisk, I know I can never undo it, he said, but I need you to know I see it now, all of it. Asterisk, that night, I realized something unexpected. Forgiveness, when it comes, doesn't arrive like a pardon. It arrives like exhaustion, like the moment you're too tired to keep carrying hate because it's heavier than grief. Asterisk, I didn't tell him I forgave him. Not in words, but I stayed. And sometimes staying is the most honest form of grace. Asterisk, people like to divide stories into villains and heroes. Real life doesn't work that way. Daniel wasn't evil. He was weak. And weakness, when mixed with fear, can destroy lives just as completely as cruelty. Asterisk, I still miss Laura. I always will. Some days I catch myself setting an extra plate at the table in my mind. Some days I dream of her standing in my kitchen, laughing softly. Asterisk, and some days I look at my son and see a man living with the full knowledge of what his choices cost him. Asterisk, that knowledge will never leave him. And perhaps it shouldn't, because some lessons are only learned when the price is permanent. Life didn't pause to give any of us time to feel ready. It kept moving forward, quietly and without mercy, asking us to keep up whether we wanted to or not. Daniel learned that the hardest part of change isn't deciding to be staying better when no one is watching and when the past refuses to loosen its grip. Asterisk, Rebecca stayed in his life, but not without struggle. There were nights Daniel would wake up gasping, convinced he had heard Laura's voice calling his name. There were days he pulled away, afraid that closeness was a luxury he hadn't earned. Rebecca never demanded answers, but she noticed everything. Eventually, she told him something that shook him more than anger ever could. Asterisk, I don't need you to be perfect, she said, but I need you to be present. If you disappear, even emotionally, I won't chase you. Asterisk, those words echoed something I had once said, though in a far harsher way. Daniel realized then that love always asks the same thing, no matter who is offering it. Show up, especially when it hurts. Asterisk, around that time, Daniel began speaking at grief support groups. At first, he sat in the back, silent, listening to strangers share stories of regret and loss. Then one evening, he spoke. He didn't soften the truth. He didn't frame himself as a victim. He said plainly that he had abandoned his wife emotionally when she needed him most, and that the weight of that failure would follow him forever. Asterisk, some people cried. Some looked at him with anger. But afterward, a young man approached him and said, I was thinking of leaving my girlfriend because her illness scares me. I won't now. Asterisk, Daniel came home shaken that night. Not proud, humble. He told me that if his worst mistake could stop someone else from making the same one, then maybe the damage he caused wouldn't be entirely meaningless. Asterisk, our relationship changed too. We spoke more honestly than we ever had before. There were no performances, no pretending. Everything was fine. He asked me about my loneliness, about the nights I stayed awake wondering if I had raised him wrong. I admitted that loving him had never stopped, but trusting him had. He accepted that without argument. One afternoon, while cleaning out old boxers, we found Laura's journals. I hadn't known she kept them. Daniel hesitated before opening one, hands trembling. Inside were ordinary thoughts, classroom frustrations, book recommendations, grocery lists. Then, near the end, the tone shifted. She wrote about fear, pain, and acceptance. And she wrote about Daniel. Asterisk, she never accused him. She never named his absence as betrayal. Instead, she wrote that she hoped he would forgive himself someday, because bitterness was a heavier illness than cancer. Asterisk, Daniel read those pages on the floor, sobbing until he could barely breathe. That was the closest thing to mercy he would ever receive from her, and it nearly broke him. Asterisk, after that, something settled inside him. Not peace, but resolve. He proposed to Rebecca months later, with honesty instead of grand promises. He told her he came with scars, regrets, and a past that would always matter. She said yes anyway. Asterisk, I attended the wedding quietly, sitting in the back. There was no spectacle, no pretense of a perfect beginning. Just two people choosing each other with open eyes. During the ceremony, Daniel glanced at me, and I saw gratitude mixed with sorrow. I nodded, not in approval of what had been, but in recognition of what was becoming. Asterisk, some people might say life rewarded him unfairly, that he moved on while Laura remained a memory in the ground. But that isn't how consequences work. Punishment isn't always loss. Sometimes it's awareness. Sometimes it's carrying the truth forever and still choosing to live decently. Asterisk, I still hear Laura's voice in quiet moments. I still wonder what might have been if my son had been braver sooner. But I also see what happens when someone refuses to look away from their worst self. My response didn't destroy him. It stripped him bare. Asterisk, and in the ruins, something fragile but honest began to grow. Years have passed now, and time has done what it always does and has layered distance over pain without ever truly erasing it. Life settled into something quieter, something more careful. Daniel and Rebecca built a home together, not filled with loud joy, but with intention. Every choice they made carried the weight of memory. Every argument ended with someone staying instead of walking away. Asterisk, Daniel never stopped visiting Laura's grave. Even after he moved cities, even after life grew busy, he returned, sometimes alone, sometimes with Rebecca, who would stand a few steps back, giving him space to speak to a woman who would always be part of their story. He told Laura about his life, not to ask for forgiveness, but to bear witness, to make sure her suffering was never dismissed or rewritten. Asterisk, as for me, I grew older, slower, more reflective. I learned that motherhood doesn't end when children become adults. It simply changes shape. Loving a grown child means accepting that you can't fix what they've broken. You can only decide whether you will stand in truth with them or hide behind comforting lies. Asterisk, one evening, years later, Daniel sat beside me on the porch as the sun set. It was quieter than usual. He told me he had been asked to speak at a hospital orientation for families facing terminal illness. They wanted him to talk about presence, about what it means to stay when leaving feels easier. Asterisk, I'm afraid, he admitted. I'm afraid I'll break down. Asterisk, I looked at my son, the man shaped by regret, responsibility, and hard-earned humility, and I said something I had never said before. Asterisk, you should break down. I told him, that's how they'll know you're telling the truth. Asterisk, he spoke at that hospital the following week. He cried. He told Laura's story without excuses, without softening the edge, and afterward, a woman whose husband had just been diagnosed hugged him and said, "Thank you for reminding me not to waste the time I still have." That was the moment I finally understood something important. Redemption doesn't mean the past stops hurting. It means the pain stops being pointless. Asterisk, Daniel never became the man Laura needed when she was alive. That failure will always exist. But he became a man who warns others not to repeat his mistake. And sometimes that is the only kind of good that can come from something unforgivable. Asterisk, people still ask me if I regret my response that day in the kitchen. If I wish I had protected my son instead of confronting him. I tell them no, because love that shields someone from the truth isn't love, it's abandonment in disguise. My words didn't destroy my son. They forced him to live awake. Asterisk, and if living awake is painful, then maybe pain is the price of becoming human again. Asterisk, when my time comes. I hope Laura knows this. She was seen, she mattered, and her suffering did not vanish into silence. It reshaped lives, it changed choices, it demanded honesty. Asterisk, and in the end, that may be the only legacy any of us can truly leave behind.